Ever since OPO 6 with the release of 8-cost Gecko Moria, black's been an extremely dominant color in the One Piece TCG. The archetype mainly revolves around reducing the cost of units and then KOing them based on that cost. This is then combined with playing a lot of units from trash, especially with the Gecko Moria. And by combining these tools, the archetype is just able to create a lot of board presence without losing many cards from hand. And then the cards they do have in hand, they are able to use to just completely control the enemy board. And this combination of things has been meta-defining for the last 2 sets. Luckily there's one card in particular that completely shuts down this game plan. And funnily enough, this is also a black card. I'm talking about 5-cost Sabo. It's a 5/6 blocker that has an on-play effect that makes your entire board immune to KO effects. So this card is just basically perfect when playing into black. There's 2 problems with this card though. One, it's a 5-cost blocker, which can make it a bit clunky to play out because you can't play any other big units out. It's a big Dawn investment. And the other one is that it's only for 1 turn, right? So you gotta time this well, and then after that turn everything is back to normal. That's where Black Yellow Luffy comes in. This deck can just completely work around these 2 problems in a way that none of the other decks can. So the first problem it's able to work around by being able to play Sabo out for 2 from life, right? With the little Sabo. This allows you to just have a lot more done to do stuff, or it allows you to play a Moria which can play out the Sabos, and then you can still perform your combo, and in this scenario you play out the Moria and 1 or 2 Sabos, or 1 Sabo and another unit. So it just allows for a lot more flexibility. The other thing is that normally you can only maybe Sabo once, twice, maybe 3 times in a game, right? But because you can just keep replaying him from trash with Gecko and with the small Sabos, you can basically have this effect up permanently as long as you have cards in your hand that can bring him back. So because of that, Black Yellow Luffy is currently the perfect counter to all the black leaders that are running around, especially like Lucci and Gecko right now. Aside from that, the deck also deals really well with decks that like to go wide. So a lot of rogue decks are really easy to deal with because this deck is consistently 9k later into the game with these 5/6 blockers on the field, which makes it extremely difficult to hit Luffy or get past the Sabos, right? I know Law's getting banned, but it also does pretty well into Law. The early game can be a bit rough. You can get rushed down too early, which could make it awkward, and also Law can obviously bottom deck 1 of your Sabos. But if you get to the later stages of the game and you're at 9k, it gets really hard for Law, because usually he won't have too much done and his whole thing is going really wide and aggressive, but doing that into a 9k leader is just incredibly tough. So if you can manage the early game, this deck does really well into that as well. So with all those things being said, this deck does have a couple of hard matchups. One, it struggles a bit against blue, and that's for 2 reasons. The first one, every blue deck right now is running pudding. And as Black Yellow Luffy, you're gonna be hoarding a lot of cards, because the more cards you have, the longer you can keep your combo going, right? But if you get caught with a pudding with like 8 cards in hand and nothing in trash, the game is probably over for you. Like, even if you pull good cards from that point on, it's very hard to recover from a -3 card deficit. The other thing you gotta worry about when playing against blue decks is the fact that they can just bottom deck your Sabos, and this leaves you really vulnerable to big attacks. Both of these things can be dealt with though, and I will go over that more in depth in the matchup part later into the video. The other matchup this deck really struggles with is the Bonnie matchup, and unfortunately I wasn't able to find anything that really helps with this matchup, aside from a couple cards, but they don't fix the matchup and it's still really rough. So if you're planning on playing this deck, do keep an eye out on the meta, because if Bonnie becomes really prevalent, this deck might be a bit rough to play. But yeah, aside from that, I think the deck is really great. Alright, so let's get into the deck list. This is the deck list I've been running with. I tried a lot of different versions of this deck, and this is the one I like the most. I'll first go over the core cards. These are just cards I think every Black Yellow Luffy deck needs and can't really be cut. And then I'll go over my personal picks and explain why I put them in here. And then after this I'll go over some cards that I didn't include, but you could consider putting into the deck. Alright, so let's first start with Sabo. Probably the best card in the deck. It gives you the amazing matchup into black. Aside from that, it also allows you to just search your pieces, because it draws you to and then trashes to, which is amazing cycle. And it's also just an amazing defensive option, right? Having a 5/6 blocker that can't be KO'd is incredibly difficult for your opponent to deal with while your leader is 9k. And being able to just consistently play 1 or 2 of these every turn puts you in a super defensive position where your opponent in a lot of cases can't do anything or the best they can do is get like 2 cards out of your hand, which is really good. So because of that, Sabo is always a 4-off in my opinion. You never really cut this card out of the deck. The next core card in this deck is Gecko Moria at 4, obviously. This card just allows you to keep going for so much longer than you would without it, because it's able to get the little brothers out of trash. So one tip I want to mention with Gecko Moria is when your opponent is taking the game really slow and not hitting your life, and you don't have a good way of getting down to 0 life yet, or you just don't want to for some reason, this card is really not bad to just play out early into the game. If you can play this card out with a Kuzan and a Garp, or just 2 Garps or something like that, it's still insane value, right? It gives you 2 cards, so it's just a +1 value Moria. And at the same time, it just establishes an 8-9 and a 4-5, which is something your opponent's gonna have to deal with. So don't be afraid to play this card out early, especially if you have multiple in hand. But yeah, aside from that, just always run this at 4. It's an amazing card in the deck and synergizes with everything you have, basically. Next up, we got Power Up Luffy, and this card does a lot for the deck. First, it's just a 5-8 stat line when activating its effect, which is really solid. Next, the effect is you trash a life and then you draw one, which is actually a lot better than just drawing a life in most cases for this deck. 1, because it sets up your trash, and 2, because later on into the game when you got stuff on your life maybe that you don't want to have there, this card is still able to get it off the life without you having to bottom deck the card. Aside from that, this card is also perfect for going down to 0 life. It gives you a lot of control in how you want to do it, since the effect after playing the card is basically free and you can activate it every turn. And the last thing you gotta keep in mind when using this card later into the game is make sure to activate this card between combos, especially if you have it set up in a way where you have 1 life remaining, because otherwise you're just gonna be missing out on the 2k, or you're gonna have to trash a life which you don't want to trash. So yeah, keep that in mind. Anyway, that's it for Power Up Luffy. Next we got Agate Luffy, which is the new addition in OP07. This card fixes a lot of issues the deck had in previous sets, where one problem the deck has is that it runs out of card fairly quickly, and this card being able to just draw you one after using its effect is really good, especially when you start cycling stuff from live. This allows you to just use 1 card less basically when doing your combo. The other thing it really helps with is the deck kind of struggles with dealing with blockers, and this card is just able to get rid of any 4 or less, which is really nice when trying to clear some blockers. I use this a lot, for example, on Rebecca's. So because of that, I think it's definitely a core card. As you can see, I am running it at 3, even though I think it's a really good card. The reason for that being is I needed some more space in the deck. And when looking at all the cards, I think it made the most sense to cut 1 Luffy. The reason for that being is, 1, you don't need this as early as some of the other brothers in the game, so you got more time to search for this card. The other reason is, this card's never really in danger of getting bottom decked, because a lot of times when you play out this card, you use its effect instantly, which basically trashes it straight away, right? Because of that, your opponent can never bottom deck this, so you don't really need to see multiple versions of this. And because of those reasons, I put it at 3. You can run it as 4, but 3 worked really nice for me. And with that, you also just run 4 of the small Luffys, because you got 2 Luffy cards, so always just run this at max capacity. Next up, we got Hiyori and Flampe. These are your core 2Ks. Flampe is just a really solid 2K, takes a life, and then it draws 1, replacing itself. This is your best option when you need to take some life. It only costs 1 done, which makes it super flexible, and yeah, there's not much else to say, just a super solid 2K. The other one is Hiyori, and this one has a very particular reason for being at 4 in the deck. So obviously you can put something on life with it and then play it out, which is pretty standard, right, and does fit well with the deck. But there's one very particular reason where I think you 100% need this card, and that is when your Sabo is in danger of getting bottom decked or removed by some deck. Hiyori is able to set up your life in a way where you have 1 life remaining after your combo. And this is extremely important in those matchups where your Sabos are vulnerable, because if you don't have that and they remove your Sabos, you're gonna have to discard your entire hand to counter out of a big attack, and because of that, I think Hiyori is a super important addition to the deck, and I always run it at 4. One more added combo I think I might have talked about earlier as well, but if you put Luffy on your life at 2 life and you play that out, you can use the Luffy effect to take another life, and in that scenario you took 2 life by only using 1 2k, which is really nice, right? So that's a combo I use a lot when using Hiyori, but yeah, just super solid 2k, and always run this at 4 off. The next core card is Garb. It's just a good searcher for 1 Dawn. The reason why I say this is a core card and the Three Brothers Bond is not is because 1, you get a 1k counter with it, and 2, it's a 2k body, which if you play this on turn 1, it can be very relevant, since this allows you to go 5-5 or 5-6 on turn 2 if you don't have a Kuzan, which is really good. One more tip I have for Searcher, and this is for all Searchers in this deck, is that definitely keep some Searchers in hand if you can. Don't always just be spamming out all your Searchers when you got done for it. The reason being is this deck needs specific pieces in specific scenarios, and early game you don't know yet what the next 3 or 4 cards are that you're gonna draw, right? So if you have a decent curve in hand and you don't really need something at that moment, just keep the search in hand, and that way when you really need something you can search it out with the card. This deck has a lot of done left over later into the game usually, before you go down to 0, because the deck doesn't really need to exactly follow curve, and that just allows you to keep the searchers in hand and really boost the consistency of the deck. That's it for Garb. The last core card is Ace, and I know some people do not consider this a core card, but in my opinion it definitely is. The reason for that being, 1, it's just a really good finisher or just a really good pressure tool in matchups where you need to be able to just cheat out some rush cards. But the other reason, which I think is way more important, is that this deck, when everything goes perfect, is pretty simple to play, right? Just keep cycling Sabos and you just keep playing Geckos and playing out Little Brothers, right? The moment it gets kind of difficult is when you don't find all your pieces. And I feel like if you don't have the extra aces, you're gonna find yourself in a lot of situations where you just don't have anything to put on live and play out, which will just add to the inconsistency of the deck. And yeah, because of that, I think Ace is definitely core card. I don't think you have to run it at 3-3. I just really like the card, so I do put it at 3-3, but I think you could get away with 2-2 if you need a bit more space in the deck. But yeah, anyway, that's it for the core cards. Now let's go over my personal picks. First card is Makino. You could choose between Makino or Perona, or you could even cut the extra 2Ks entirely. I really prefer the utility that Makino has. It just gives you another option of reducing your life for 1 Dawn, which gets you out of some tricky situations. And also, if you can play this out early and you find some 5-cost brothers on life, that can put you in some really nasty situations where you just set up your life in a way where you're able to just go down to 0 life for super cheap, and then or set up your life in a way where you get it exactly how you want it, without using any Hiyori's or Flampe's. So for that reason, I think Makino is really good. Alright, let's talk about Kuzan. This card got added after Egghead Luffy got released, and this card does so much for the deck. So it's the best 4-Dawn drop you have available in all the cards, I think. It replaces itself on play with a new card, and then provides so much pressure on the board that it's just not matched by anything else. Because a lot of our game plan revolves around playing Sabos, we can easily protect this card once it's down and it survives a turn. Let's for example take the Lucci matchup. If we play out this card, we force our opponent to instantly deal with this. If they can't, from that point on they can never play out a Mori or Isho safely again, right? And that puts them in an extremely awkward spot, because on 9 Dawn they need to play that card, because that's their only cards that reliably can hit our face without spending a bunch of Dawn while we're at 9k. And we force our opponent into either just playing out the Mori or the Isho and praying we don't have Egghead Luffy, or doing some other stuff that they would rather not be doing. And if their Mori or Isho gets removed by this combo, at that point you're so far ahead, the match is probably over anyway, right? The only reason I'm not running him at 4 is later into the game he can get a bit bricky in hand since he doesn't have any counter. And I found that when running him at 4 I got him a little too often later into the game. There are spots where you can still play out this card when you're at 10 Dawn, but usually you need all your Dawn to perform combos and stay at 9k, and then this card's just dead in hand. So for that reason it is a 3-off for me, but yeah, definitely a super great card in the deck that synergizes with the deck really well. My next personal pick is Ice Age. This card is basically just there for the bunny matchup. If they play a 9-cost Zoro and you don't have a way to remove that, you're done. The game is over at that point, right? Yeah, and aside from that, this can also come in clutch when dealing with like kids or other big units. I have removed Morias and Ishos with this as well. The one thing I think you do need to keep in mind is this thing does kind of nuke your hand size, since it's just a -1 for reducing the cost. Which at minimum that takes the combo of removing something up to 2 cards, which doesn't seem like a big deal. And you do get the card pack from Agate Luffy, of course, but when you play around with it, you definitely will feel using this card, especially because hand size is so important in this deck. And the other awkward part is you cannot play this and then Moria, Agate Luffy and something else on the board, because you just don't have enough done. So because of that, it's a bit clunky sometimes, but yeah, I just think you need this for the bunny matchup, because otherwise I think you're gonna be in situations where there's just nothing you can do. And the last card I put in is Three Brothers Bond. This is just extra search, helps with the consistency of the deck. I think 2 is enough. It puts you at 6 searchers, which usually is enough to find your pieces when you need them. But yeah, that's it for my deck list. I'll now go over some cards that aren't included, but I think you could include if you would want to. So one of the cards I've seen people run and never really liked myself is Ivankov. So I talked previously about Hiyori and the importance of being able to set up a situation where you have 1 life left after using your combo, and this card basically does the same, right? My problem with this card is instead of taking the life, you trash it, which, as I said with Ice Age, it's only 1 card difference, right? But in this deck, you definitely really feel that difference, and because of that, I just never really liked running Ivankov. I always felt like if I played this card, my hand size would instantly be destroyed. The only case I could see where I would like this card maybe is if you're running against a blue deck, and you just want to get your hand size down to get out of putting range, then this could be an okay option. But aside from that, I just personally don't really like it, but you could run this. The other option is Perona. I ran this card before Agate Luffy came out, but since we got Kuzan now, I don't think you really need this card because we got a 4-down option. Next, we're going to be talking about Thunderbolt and the 5-cost Sabo. They both have the same effect, only one is on a 5-cost character and the other one is on an event. I ran both of these cards back in OPO6, I tried both of them, and they do fit pretty well into the deck. I do think with the banning of RP Law, this card is less necessary, because one of the main uses these had was getting rid of 5-cost Kit. But I do think they're a good option if you are looking for some more removal. Again, they have the trash 1 card from the top of your life, which is a bit rough for the hand size sometimes. But being able to get down a life from 2 down, for example with Thunderbolt, while KOing something can be really good. And because of that, I do think you could consider running this card, especially if you're running a more removal focused deck list. Small addition to this part. Most of this video was actually recorded before I played the Treasure Cup, and a lot of people are playing Finger Pistol in the Treasure Cup, which I actually think is a really good 3rd option here, which I'm definitely considering putting in myself. The way I would include it in my current list is I would get rid of Ice Age, because what Finger Pistol does is it hits a 5-cost, or it KOs a 5-cost for 4 dawn. And this doesn't look too special on the surface, but it actually is really good for the deck, because 1, Luchis are taking in a lot of Nightmare Luffy, and you want to get rid of that as fast as possible, since it can just trash a unit, so your Sabos will be vulnerable with that card on the board. Secondly, it's pretty good into the mirror. If someone plays out a 5-cost power-up Luffy, you can just get rid of it instantly. And with a Kuzan, you can actually hit 9-cost with this. It is a bit tricky into Bonnie, obviously, because your Kuzan still is really vulnerable, because once you attack, she can just rest it. But honestly, I kinda gave up on trying to fix the Bonnie matchup, since it's just so bad and you don't see it too often. Now with the law ban, you might see it a bit more often, but I don't really think Ice Age fixes the matchup, and if you can play around this with Kuzan, you might be able to do it. But yeah, that's why I think Finger Pistol is a really good option. One more underrated part of Finger Pistol is that it's 4 down, which is actually perfect, because you can use Finger Pistol and then still activate your full combo if you have the Little Brothers in hand, because your full combo costs 6 down, right? So with this you'll have the perfect amount of cards, and you don't have to trash a life. So yeah, that's what I think about Finger Pistol, and I think it's a good addition to the deck. Which brings me to my next point, 10-cost Kuzan. I never really liked this card in the deck, because I think it's too hard to play in most games safely. Because let's say you played it on 10 down, right? What stops your opponent from just rushing you down, because you're a 5k leader at that point, and forcing you to waste all your cards from hand? That's kind of my problem with this card. Also, I find it hard to make space for it, because you would probably have to go a more removal heavy style of deck. So if you run this, maybe you cut the ace out entirely. which transforms the deck kind of in a more control-focused deck. The one case I would see for this card is if you have a lot of opponents that just don't want to attack your life, then this could be a super good option, right? If this card sticks, it's basically GG for the opponent, because at that point your Agate Luffy just KOs 9 cost for 2 down from life, right? Which is insane. But setting this card up, in my opinion, is a bit too hard, so that's why I don't really like it. But if you like this card, you can try some stuff and maybe you can make it work with a more control-focused version of the deck. It's an interesting card for sure, but it just doesn't really fit my playstyle. Anyway, that's it for the deck list and the cards. Hey, unfortunately the matchup part got cut from the video. The video took a while to make, and when I got to the part of the matchups, I just decided to cut it all together, since I changed my mind on a lot of this info after the Treasure Cup, and OPO 8 is in 3 days from me recording this, so a lot of this info is going to be irrelevant anyway. If you're interested to see the matchup part, let me know in the comments. I might update the guide in a future video or just upload the matchup part separately, going over each matchup. But yeah, if you're still here at the end of the video, I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video or found it useful at all. And I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.